Hello, everybody. Larson here with another Kung Fail addendum. And boy, do I have something special for you all today. I've profiled the one and only Frank Dukes before, but I have something new to talk about with regards to him. I finally got a copy of his book, The Secret Man. Kind of. I did not get a physical copy of it because it is out of publication and I would have to pay $50 plus to get a copy of it. I'll be damned if I pay $50, $75, even $100 for this garbage. No, I found an audiobook recording of the seminal work, and thus I listened to it instead. The book has it all: thrills, chills, kills, and sex. The Kumite, it's here. Spy adventures with sexy exotic femmes fatales? You got it. What works in Indochina? Sure thing. And is any of it true? Absolutely not. Is it well written? No. But we're going to go through it anyway. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of each chapter and highlight any of Frank's exploits that are interesting or impressive. And so, without further ado, The Secret Man, the true story, wink wink, of an American warrior. Chapter 1. It opens up with him in the midst of tracking a serial killer, a rogue CIA agent who was killing foreigners and drug connections. And I quote, "I had my orders and personal obligations to pay back Fish. I had my own personal stake to pay him back for the long, convoluted chase I'd been on these past months. I wasn't afraid. I was a former world champion martial artist only a few years past my prime. I had the fastest punches alive." He literally references scenes from the movie Bloodsport, like snatching the coin out of the guy's hand, and winning the Kumite, being nicknamed Fa Ma by his biggest fans. Of course you did, Frank. He also claims to have been on Black Ops in Indochina. These are all claims you should be well familiar with, and well aware that they are wrong, if you have seen my previous video. Fish operated in Latin America. He was as cunning as a fox and considered the world his chicken coop. Jesus, Frank, learn how to write. That's like the hackiest of pulp detective fiction writing. But speaking of canines, he goes to Fish's house and sprays knockout gas to a guard dog's face and finds Polaroids of Fish sadomasochistically torturing people. He tracks Fish to another place where he kidnaps a baby, and Duke heroically chases after him on cars, but then also on foot after the cars crash. For you see, Frank rammed Fish off the road and into a telephone pole, and Fish just walked it off and was able to retreat on foot. But why stop there, Frank? Surely there was a razor scooter or a pogo stick you could have hopped on instead. Fish tied the baby to a tree branch, killing it, and then continued running away. And Dukes, surprisingly, fails in his mission. I mean, this mission never actually happened, of course, but he at least had some control over his monstrous ego, and he didn't just say he succeeded with flying colors. If you are making fiction, your fictional hero should show some weakness once in a while. Chapter 2. It opens up with a Polish-British lass asking Frank if he ever killed anyone as they dine in West Hollywood. I'm surprised he doesn't just claim he was banging Ingrid Pitt, and yes, that is the only person of that particular ethnicity and gender I can think of. In the room, the woman come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Note that I said woman, not women. Direct quote, Frank again cannot write worth a crap, but I might be being too hard on him. Clearly, you don't have time to take English classes if you're banging Hollywood starlets and being a Kumite champion who also pioneered his own martial arts style, Duke's Ryu Ninjutsu. Too much head trauma, you see, both the big and small head. In fact, the entirety of Chapter 2 is largely about the amorous adventures of Frank. After he discusses his relationship with Gabrielle, the Polish woman I described, he describes his whirlwind romance with a dark-skinned Lebanese woman who would rip off his clothes and have sex with him literally anywhere. Phone booths, hotel lobbies, and then one time Frank used his lighter to trigger the sprinklers as he and Farah or Ortal, or whatever the hell this woman's name allegedly was, made love to him under the water. Yeah, that happened. Anyway, it turns out this woman was a femme fatale under terrorist employee, and she was neutralized by another CIA agent shortly thereafter. So apparently, not only is Frank Dukes a real-life Rambo and a real-life Bruce Lee, he's also James Bond and Casanova as well. Wow. Frank, you're not James Bond. You're not even James Bond. Chapter 3. We open up with Mr. Dukes on a stakeout. Frank informs us of how you can tell if somebody's carrying a gun by their posture and body language. That is very true. And I'm sure Frank was taught that in the CIA training headquarters and not just by reading open source documents that literally anybody can get for free. He was real. None of that fake macho bullshit in the movies.
He was real. None of that fake macho bullshit in the movies.
Anyway, not much happens in this chapter, or chapter 4 for that matter. Chapter 4 is mostly him talking about his service in the United States Marine Corps, which is technically not a lie. He did serve in the Marines, but only stateside. He never actually went overseas. Chapter 5, 1993, Spec War Conference, where a bunch of ex-Special Ops guys hang out. Yes, because I'm sure that covert agents and Special Forces soldiers have conferences they go to. Frank knows everybody clearly, as well as knowing General Norman Schwarzkopf on a first-name basis. Never mind the fact that Schwarzkopf explicitly denied that. It's all classified, you see. He also claims to have run into a Mr. Tony the Tiger, not the serial mascot, of course. I'm surprised he had that amount of restraint, but a fellow CIA super stud who fought with Frank in Panama. Mr. Tiger then became a pimp and was at the time also working at a defense contracting company. To be fair, prostitution and the military-industrial complex have a lot more in common than you would think. Frank also claims to have had a body double take his place whilst he was doing black ops abroad. Considering the math on the Kumite, which we did in the last video, I presume it was one of those alternate dimension Franks that just happened to replace Prime Frank. It's perfectly fine, just remember that never the Franks shall meet. He then goes on to describe further CIA boondoggles in Guatemala and Nicaragua. And I quote, "We nearly died together so many times that if one of us hit the dirt, the other would have to go at the same time." At the conference, Frank has well-wishers coming up to him starstruck. "Are you the guy JCVD tried to impersonate in Bloodsport?" I don't think acting is impersonation, turnip-like, though the acting may have been, according to one reviewer of said film. Does Frank really think people just randomly impersonate him? I have my doubts, and I say this as somebody who has briefly been impersonated. I wasn't sure who I really was. "Who are you?" Lucas Foster asked. "Yeah, I'm not entirely sure who you are either, Frank, but it's definitely not the globe-trotting superhero you claim to be. Like Lewis Carroll's Alice, I had taken on so many identities. I wasn't quite sure. The world in which I moved in was a hell of a lot more dangerous than Wonderland. Ignoring the absurdity of a middle-aged man that isn't Marty Balin comparing himself to Lewis Carroll stories, I don't know about Wonderland being non-dangerous. American McGee's Alice was pretty dangerous, and the March Hare is a master martial artist according to that one Dungeons & Dragons module. No, I've never played Dungeonland, but I imagine the Kung Fu Master March Hare looking like T. Hoppy here. Also, my god, I'm referencing Clay Fighter. Jesus, I'm old. Anyway, Frank Dukes goes into his history here, starting with Grandpa William Dukes, who fought at Gallipoli with distinction, citation needed. His father, Alfred, then served with the UK's Jewish Brigade in World War II, 1944 to 1945, who also had a reputation for daring do, hijacking Kubel wagons at gunpoint and such, citation needed. Clearly badassery runs in the Dukes family, citation definitely needed. Oh wait, it gets better. After the war, Alfred Dukes smuggled arms to the Nakam group that wanted to commit a counter-genocide against Germany in vengeance for the Jews, a group he refers to as the Avengers. First off, I don't know if that's something to brag about, and secondly, it's all complete horseshit. I couldn't verify any of that. Anyway, Alfred Dukes then moved to Canada and sired a son shortly after, and that's our boy Frank. Please refer to my first video that detailed how the dates for Alfred's military service do not add up chronologically. Chapter 6. The chapter opens up with Frank giving a very detailed description of a Passover Seder. I wasn't aware his Jewish identity was such an important part of his life. It's cool, I suppose. Funny how the movie didn't mention this at all. Boy, did you expect that in a book about being the secret man, ultimate warrior, that there would be so many discussions of matzah and horseradish? But it ties in. He talks about how his dad, during his totally real military service, survived on horseradish and water in the Sahara Desert. Then goes into him moving to the USA, the contrast between his father's military life and his mundane current life. Only after I had experienced the seamy side of intelligence and espionage did I appreciate what my father did for his family. Frank, your masturbation fantasies don't count as the seamy side of anything. Chapter 7. Now here's where we get to the actual, training. Now this is going to get good. The chapter opens up with Frank as a 13-year-old whining about how he came in dead last in a judo tournament, in which he was put against older high school kids due to being an advanced student. I don't know about that, but I do definitely believe the idea of him coming in last in a martial arts tournament. I would never succeed. I was a fat loser who would be doomed to failure. No, we're not ending here. As Frank whines in the locker room, a mysterious old Asian man approached him. Oh god, I see where this is going. He had a youthfulness in his step, unlike other old people. You have the potential to die very well. said the mysterious old man with a scar on his cheek and a missing pinky finger. Well, surely you're leaving things out, Frank. Did he have a big wispy beard and wear parachute pants also? I was a loser. Why would they show any interest in me? Why indeed? I'm sorry, Shang Tsung here then asked Frank to study with him. It would be a big favor to me. This is, of course, Frank's legendary Shidoshi, Senzo Tiger Tanaka. He puts Frank through a hellish training regimen, squeezing balls of wax, climbing ropes, scaling between buildings, and also gardening. Now, Frank acknowledges that this sounds almost exactly like The Karate Kid or 36 Chambers of Shaolin or The Drunken Master or any other martial arts movie, but it's all legitimate ninja training, dude, I swear. A period of crisis from which I had the opportunity to shed our old skin and emerge into a new phase of life with increased wisdom and ability. He told me the story of how the art of Keto came to be developed. The founder had asthma and developed it as a means by which he could mend and defend himself. Frank also has asthma. Oh my god, Frank is the great white ninja of destiny. From this point on, Frank makes his own guidelines, developing his own techniques to kill or immobilize opponents quickly. He does even more complicated training techniques, like kicking out lit candles and doing the coin swap trick on participants. But these parlor tricks were not the main goal of Master Dukes' training. He had to gain the 4 attributes of valor, wisdom, benevolence, and courage. That totally sounds legit and not some whack nonsense he pulled from a video game. He then gives a history of his master, not to be confused with the actual history of Senzo Tanaka, the truck farmer and Manzanar attorney, but according to Frank's book, Tiger Tanaka joined Japanese intelligence in 1905, then eventually the Black Dragon Society of ultra-nationalist fanatics in the 1930s. Again, this isn't really something to be proud of, Frank. And boy, Frank Duke sure associates with a lot of fascist madmen. The point of all this is that as a young man, Tanaka is so impressed with Frank, he introduces him to CIA contacts. Somewhere in between all this, Frank also has a piece of raw steak put in his shorts and is forced to run from dogs in a scene that isn't at all ripped from another movie. I wanted to follow my master and my father's footsteps, but in the unrealistic daydreams of youth, I had little idea of where I would go. Yeah, there's some unrealistic daydreams, all right. And in the midst of all this, Frank is introduced to William Casey, CIA head, while at a urinal. Casey introduces himself as the head of the CIA, because that's what you say to people that you meet in the toilet, and has Frank work for him undercover. Conveniently, so there's no record of Frank ever working for the CIA. Chapter 8. In this chapter, Frank talks about how anybody debunking him is obviously part of a scheme to discredit him, which is a standard problem for a CIA superhero, much like himself, of course. Such campaigns demand little effort or imagination. A mere suggestion is enough to damage the credibility of an individual or organization. He cites FBI COINTEL against the civil rights movement as an example. Yes, Frank, because a guy who makes up superhero stories about himself is totally the same as the civil rights movement. In 1980, the editor of Black Belt magazine said he would blackball me if I didn't sell him my stories' book rights. End quote. Oh god, it's Frank Dukes fighting the manager of Black Belt magazine. Truly, this is the blind versus the blind, and whoever wins, we lose. Shortly after that, Rainbow Publications started a ninja book sales bonanza that sought to cash in on the craze of the 80s, thus threatened the true ninjas like Frank himself. Even Jon Stewart knew better because he saw me do the death touch. This skill involves channeling energy into the human body to cause death without leaving a bruise. Well said. Also in this chapter, Frank admits that he got his shit pushed in by Zane Frazier in 1993, but he still claims he was sucker punched by him with brass knuckles. He doesn't name the culprit, but he does claim that he was arrested after this altercation in 1993. Funnily enough, there is no police record of such. The point is, this is all a CIA counterintelligence thing, a preemptive strike to destroy Frank's credibility once he left the organization. The IRS seized his assets around the same time that an expose in the Times revealed all his lies. COINTEL is never one punch, it's always in groups. He ends the chapter with one of his totally real CIA exploits involving KGB poison darts and killer guard dogs in San Francisco. We've got KGB in Hollywood, Frank. Get your ass there. And that ties into Chapter 9. Now, this is more like it. Dead ends and dead bodies going nowhere. Being in on a KGB bus is just what the doctor ordered for some adrenaline. Frank claims that a Soviet defector and his family were being hassled by the KGB in West Hollywood. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the KGB strictly internal security and the GRU would be doing the international stuff? What do I know? I mean, I'm just a guy who took one class on the history of the Soviet Union. I'm not a spy like Frank. Brian Chapman, supervising LAPD detective, had little idea of what awaited that evening. He's Frank's liaison on the street. Frank gets into position in disguise as a plumber, setting up his scope behind storage boxes. And the KGB strikes, trying to extract said defector and his family, but American law enforcement was on the case. A tactical squad from the Cobra unit blocked off the road. The KGB car jumped the curb and ran over some garbage cans to get away, crashing into a wall as the driver started legging it to get away. Chapman fired his pistol at the assailant and struck him down. Brian Chapman is the only U.S. police officer to kill a senior KGB agent. I looked this up and I couldn't find any evidence of this either. What a shock. Anyway, to avoid having to deal with the cover-up of this international incident, Frank is sent to that hotbed of espionage, East St. Louis. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of international spying going on in East St. Louis. What the hell are you going to find in East St. Louis? Like the world's supply of Rap Snacks? Chapter 10. Frank goes to East St. Louis, and yeah, it's a shithole. He's on another investigation. The body was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range. Ballistics report indicated that it was a Russian gun and a Russian caliber. You would think it was the KGB, but it wasn't. It was an American firing a Russian gun, perhaps trying to frame the Russians for murder. A plan bubbled up from the bloody recesses of a warped mind. A scheme by which he exacted some sort of twisted revenge by implicating those commie bastards. All of a sudden, Frank plays the nice, sensible moderate, an advocate of détente. Anyway, Frank catches the guy. Frank also points out that he carries an arsenal. They call him the Man of Steel, not because of his power, but because he carries a lot of steel improvised weapons on him, like a steel comb, more painful than a knife in the right hands. The silent guy was silent no more, howling up a storm and clenching at his side. I retrieved the gun dropped during the scuffle. It was the murder weapon, I'm sure of it. Yeah, anyway, Frank then kicks the guy in the crotch, half-heartedly, and walks away like a boss as the guy throws up. But the old man was soon to unleash the biggest surprise of all. Yeah, and it just goes on like this. What I've detailed here is about half the book, and this already makes me want to stick a shotgun in my mouth. I've taken 7 pages of notes, and I'm really tired of it. So I listened to the rest of it, and let's just briefly go over that. The rest of the book is about alleged CIA adventures, which includes being the sole survivor of a Halo jump into Iran, being part of a joint CIA-KGB operation to investigate the Sverdlovsk anthrax leak, and having to tragically sell his Kumite sword, his trophy for winning the interdimensional martial arts tournament, to save a bunch of Filipino orphans from pirates. Yes, really. And I quote, "I sold my sword. I have no regrets for it. It was for a good cause. Went to buy kids out of slavery who are on the pirate ships. What they do is the local chiefs, if you would, on Mindanao and stuff, they take the kids who are orphans and they put them on the ships and they go to the South China Sea. The ships are crowded and uncomfortable. I'm talking a normal bunk has 4 or 5 kids squeezed into that thing. They live in the elements. They die. The Filipino government turns a blind eye. So Duke said he and some friends wanted to help out. He gave the pirates money from the sale of the sword. But the pirates reneged at the last moment. We took up arms and we fought the boat pirates and we saved the kids. Many of them are now in the United States. I'm in touch with some of them, and they love me to death. And I'll tell you, I got one kid who's about 15 years old. All I have to do is look cross-eyed at one guy, and he will kill for me. But hey, if I doubt those stories, then clearly I'm part of Oliver North's smear team against Dukes, and I should probably be in fear for my life. So yeah, that's the secret man. It's a load of horse shit. Once again, Frank Dukes has some legitimate martial arts training, and he made a nice little career out of telling nonsensical superhero stories about himself. But he really ought to have quit while he was ahead. You know, sadly, the days where any man could put on black pajamas and throw half-assed kicks and be a millionaire from it are long past us. Perhaps it is time to hang up the Tabata, Frank. I'm Larson Halleck, and fuck this shit.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Hello, are you a fan of Larson Halleck and the Barbaric Gentleman? Of course you are, otherwise you wouldn't be watching. Would you like to help the channel grow? Here's how you can. You can go to patreon.com and pledge some money, joining the ranks of the illustrious heroes you'll find at the end of the video. You can also go to paypal.me/LarsonHalleck to give me some money, or you can follow me on social media, at Larson Halleck on Twitter and Instagram. I don't use right-wing grifter sites like Gab and Parler because they suck. You can also buy my books. The links to do so are in the video description. And of course, please subscribe and spread the word. That name again is Larson Halleck, and I hope you enjoyed the video.